Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the opening lecture of the online lecture series organized by the Department of English, সাঁওতাল বিদ্রোহ সার্ধ শতবার্ষিকী মহাবিদ্যালয়, গোয়ালতোড়, পশ্চিম মেদিনীপুর. It is our privilege to have Dr. Debdas Roy as speaker today. Dr. Roy is an associate professor and head, Department of English, Sukumar Sengupta Mahavidyalaya, Keshpur, Paschim, Medinipur. Now I request my colleague, Sri Shobhan Maiti, to say a few words on the online lecture series and introduce our esteemed speaker. Over to you, Shobhan.
Thank you, sir. Good morning to all. Welcome to the first lecture of the online lecture series organized by the Department of English, সাঁওতাল বিদ্রোহ সার্ধ শতবার্ষিকী মহাবিদ্যালয়, গোয়ালতোড়, পশ্চিম মেদিনীপুর. At present, we face an unprecedented set of problems relating to the environment. Coronavirus pandemic has triggered significant changes in all segments of our life. Academia was among the first few sectors that faced rapid shutdown of all its activities. The times are changing, and the theories have always pointed out towards the survival of the fittest. It is a fact that to survive this pandemic, the entire planet must reformulate its modes of operating. This crisis can be looked upon as an opportunity to reconstruct our long-standing, centuries-old chalk and talk teaching model and establish better and updated technology-based practices. The pandemic has thus pushed the world to drastically reinvent ways of coping with the new normal. We must prepare ourselves for the changing world when COVID-19 pandemic is blown off. Keeping in mind the need of the hour, we have organized an online lecture series aiming at imparting quality e-learning to the students, engaging them academically, and making them psychologically fit and morally upright. Now, it's the time to introduce you with today's esteemed speaker. I feel greatly honored to introduce one of my respected Gurudevs of my postgraduate days. He is a very well-known face to academia. His name is abbreviated as DR, and literally he is endearing to both teaching and students community. Yes, I am speaking of double DR, Dr. DR, Honorable Dr. Debdas Roy, Associate Professor and Head, Department of English, Sukumar Sengupta Mahavidyalaya, Keshpur, Paschim Medinipur. He is also a guest teacher in the Department of English, Vidyasagar University. He did his PhD on John Donne's poetry and sermons at Vidyasagar University under the supervision of Professor Tirthankar Das Purokayastha, an eminent poet and literator of Bengal. He has a fairly good number of publications to his credit. He is the chief editor of Middle Flight, ISSN 23197684, a peer-reviewed journal approved by the UGC. Dr. Roy has authored 2 books jointly with Dr. Pritha Kundu. The books are Understanding Romantic Poetry, A Critical Reader, and Shakespeare in Focus, in commemoration of the quarter centenary of Shakespeare's death. We cordially welcome you, sir, and thanks a lot for accepting our invitation. Now it's over to you, sir. Sir, please.
Thank you, Professor Shobhan Maiti of Gwaldor SBSS College for introducing me so cordially, so precisely. And I'm hardly worthy of the praises you have showered upon me. But nevertheless, I feel proud and privileged to be a part of this online lecture series. And I also thank Professor Arup Ratan Chakraborty, the head of the Department of English of your college. And I take the opportunity of congratulating and thanking the other departmental members. And especially from the bottom of my heart, I thank Dr. Montu Kumar Das, the patron and principal of the college, for providing me with the scope to speak here. Actually, You have well mentioned about the pandemic and the situation of change. Rightly said, it gives a fit introduction to what I'm going to talk. But during the pandemic, I freshly remember the last webinar you organized. So many webinars are being organized nowadays, but I think that the last webinar organized by your department and patronized by Dr. Montu Kumar Das was a unique one. And I listened to it, and the academia is all praised for that. Once again, I take the opportunity of congratulating you on that huge thumping success. Now, I also extend my very, very warm welcome to the students who, braving the COVID, braving the pandemic situation, have chosen to join me here, have chosen to focus, to listen to my talk. I say, I confess that this talk is meant especially for the students. It is meant for the students and those who are looking for something scholarly may feel betrayed. I confess at the very outset. So once again, I thank the students who have joined me. And with these words, I'd like to begin my talk. My talk is on Victorian poetry. I mean, rereading Victorian poetry with special reference to Tennyson's Ulysses. Ulysses is a known text and it is there in the syllabus of many universities, of our university also. That's why I have chosen to focus on this poem Ulysses, which is quite famous and which is after my heart also. I like the poem very much. So that's why, as it is there in the syllabus and it is as it is after my heart, I have chosen to read this poem with the students. Now, to begin with, Michel Foucault, in his book, The Order of Things, Archaeology of Human Sciences, makes a critique of the continuous genetic history. Continuous genetic history is not proper, he says, because it does not take into account, because it ignores the implicit philosophies, the unformulated thematics, the rules of formation of knowledge, which are not always understood by consciously understood at least by those by the people living during that period. Yes, Victorian period has been regarded as a gap. Victorian period has been considered to be in between. It is in between Romanticism and modernism, it has been said. Many of the literary historians have said that Victorian period does not exist in its own right. For example, David Debsas says that Victorian poetry is a continuation of Keats's rich colors and sensuous imagery. He says that Victorian poetry, Victorian literature is a continuation even of 18th century Gothic sensationalism. Even David Debsas says that Victorian poetry goes back to or indebted to, or rather, it is modeled upon Elizabethan and Jacobean models, he says. Not only that, David Debsas, in his book A Critical History of English Literature, also says that Tennyson's poems, chiefly lyrical, is romantic in spirit. Yes, Victorian poetry has been looked upon as a gap, as a transition. It is on the way to somewhere. It is on the way from romantic poetry and on the way to modern poetry. It constitutes as if a gap. This is the common censor. This is the common opinion nurtured by the literary critics and historians. Now, let us have a look where the moderns look upon themselves. After Victorian period comes modern period, all of you know, dear students. Now, during the modern period, modernism loves to see itself in terms of a break with history. Modernism claims that it it is not a part of Victorian poetry. Modern poetry claims that modern poets are not indebted to Victorian poetry. Rather, they are indebted to the Romantic and others, but not to Victorian poetry, they said. They do not look upon Tennyson, Browning, Arnold with respect. Not only that, they have forged certain, what should I say, stereotype images of Victorian poetry. Victorianism means modern say that Victorianism means religiousness. Victorianism means morality, no sense of humor, lack of humor, idolatry, woman worship, yet relegating women to the secondary role in society, subjugation of women. All these derogatory, pejorative images have been created about Victorian poetry. So, modern poets never acknowledge this. And as stranded remnants of high liberalism, bourgeois liberalism, they call modern poets, call the Victorian poets that they are bourgeois and they belong to the ideology of liberalism. So, as stranded remnants of high bourgeois liberalism, the Victorian poets have been consigned to sepia. Sepia means monochromatic. Sepia means lacking fervor. Sepia means no multicolored. So black and white, I should say. So they have been stigmatized by the modern poets. But strangely enough, you will be surprised to learn that modern poetry also is indebted to a great extent to Victorian poetry. Let me give one or two examples. Come to W.B. Yeats. W.B. Yeats himself criticized. He has said that Tennyson has not imbibed anything from the common thought, from the general thought. This is the censor of W.B. Yeats. But W.B. Yeats himself, he wrote the poem Second Coming. It's a famous poem. I believe you have read the poem, you have learned it by heart. Now, this poem, The Second Coming, is hugely indebted to one of the poems of Tennyson, The Kraken. The Kraken is a monster and who remains at sea, and Spiritus Mundi is also a monster who remains on the desert. There are some parallels between this poem and uh, the Second Coming and Kraken. The Kraken sips in abysmal sea. Look at the echoes. I want to draw your attention to the similarities between the two poems, whether you will judge whether Yeats was influenced or not. The Kraken, the monster Kraken, sleeps in abysmal sea. Spiritus Mundi resides somewhere in sands of the desert. The Kraken, his ancient, dreamless, uninvaded sleep, Yeats says, Tennyson says, and Yeats says that 20 centuries of stony sleep, almost sleep. Think of the echoes. At the end of the poem, Tennyson says that when the sea monster Kraken will come to the surface, he will be seen by a man and angel who will be the cause of his death. And Yeats says that one born of Bethlehem will be the cause of the death of this rough beast. So you can well understand that Kraken, the poem Kraken, is much influenced by influenced the poem The Second Coming by W.B. Yeats. Come to T.S. Eliot. New critics have stigmatized, new criticism has stigmatized modern poetry. And Eliot himself is very critical. In his essay, The Metaphysical Poets, famous essay 1921, all of you have read, he says that Tennyson and Browning merely ruminated, quote unquote. Tennyson and Browning merely ruminated. And he also said that Tennyson and Browning, do not cannot feel their thoughts as immediately as the odor of a rose. He has come down hard upon Tennyson and Browning. But let us see what David Nate Tobin say about this. The fact is that before coming to Tobin's observation, very significant observation made by Tobin, but before coming to that, I would like to say that the Wasteland and Burnt Norton and the four quartets, the first poem is the Burnt Norton. These two collections were immensely influenced, much influenced by uh, Tennyson, especially Tennyson, and In Memoriam. David Ned Tobin, in his book The Presence of the Past, T.S. Eliot's Victorian Inheritance. In this book, he says Tennyson provides a major influence on Eliot's poetry throughout his career, he says. And of all his poems, In Memoriam had the most pervasive effect, as its wasteland imagery, style, subject, and experimental structure appear again in the wasteland. Indeed, Tobin is saying in this book, indeed, the wasteland in many ways appear a spiritual rewriting of Tennyson's In Memoriam. Although Eliot imitated Tennyson in his first poems, by this time he set out on his own path. He tended to denigrate his predecessor in critical essays. But as he matured, he increasingly acknowledged Tennyson's mastery. Later on, T.S. Eliot acknowledged it. So, new criticism also is very critical, and cultural criticism also. Raymond Williams, he also did not pay any attention to Victorian poetry. Now, let us come to the Victorian poets themselves, Victorian writers themselves. Victorian writers themselves, they consider themselves to be modern. I mean, they consider themselves to be modern. It means that they were very conscious of their contemporaneity, and they were also very conscious of their historicity. To be conscious or to be modern is to be secondary, then the Victorian poets never deny that they are indebted to the Romantic poets. In fact, many of the Victorian poets belong to the Romantic blocks, Wordsworth Coleridgean block. Tennyson himself belonged. So they never say that we do not belong, we constitute a gap. They never say. Rather, they accept that the Victorian condition is the outcome of industrialism, of certain changes, structural changes, paradigmatic changes that came to or that were introduced during the Romantic period. So, the Victorian situation, according to the Victorian poets, the Victorian situation is the outcome of Romantic period, of a condition which emanate from the previous period, from the preceding period. Arnold wrote how conscious they were about their modernness, that Arnold wrote one very famous essay, which were there in the syllabus, undergraduate syllabus, perhaps in some university it is there, on the modern element in literature. In this essay, Arnold discusses about modernism. And, in this essay, in a very significant essay, Arnold says that the word modern does not merely mean being contemporary. You cannot claim that you are modern because you are much advanced, you are ahead in time. Modernism is a quality which is different, he says, contemporary. If you say that, he says that Greek people were also very modern. They're very refined, cultured, perhaps better than ours, he says in the essay. In order to be modern, Arnold says, in order to be modern, you have to possess the proper spirit. That is important. Possessing or having the proper spirit is the hallmark of modernism, according to uh, Arnold. You have to have the bent of mind to contemplate the vast and complex spectacle of life. That is very important. During the Victorian period, the spectacle of life was crowded. So many ideologies, were there. So whether you have the right perspective to contemplate the spectacle before you, that is important according to. That constitutes modernism. The power to interpret, the power to understand, to power to illuminate the hard facts before you. It is important to Arnold. And it is modernism, he says. If you have that capacity, then only you are modern and you are intellectually delivered, he says. So, Meredith wrote one poem, Modern Love. Meredith's poem, Modern Love. So, Victorian writers were, they never, Victorian poets, they never claimed that we do not belong to Romanticism. We are break, we constitute a break, like that. They accepted and the historical condition. They accepted the fact that modernism, the quality of being modern is not something cut off from the past. They never say. And one eminent critic, Isabel Armstrong, Isabel Armstrong, in her book, the name of the book is Victorian Poetry, Poets, Politics, 1996. This book is very important. In this book, Isabel Armstrong has tried to rescue Victorian poetry from the long-standing charges. The charge is that Victorian poetry is the moralized form of romantic verse. This is the charge brought against. And Isabel Armstrong, in her book Victorian Poetry, Poets, Politics, 1996. I am very respectful of this book and this author. It is a nicely written book. She claims that she rescues Victorian poetry of this long-standing CPI image, of this moralized, the charge that Victorian poetry is a moralized form of romantic verse. It is, yes, during the Victorian period, there are really certain changes, all of you know, as students of history of literature. During that period, certain major changes took place in the world of religion, in the world of industry, in the world of education, in the world of legislation, in the world of politics, whatnot. Great changes took place. And this change has been well celebrated or well recorded by Tennyson, the representative Victorian voice. He grapples with this change and he reflects this change in his poetry. You remember the poem, The Passing of Arthur. In the poem, The Passing of Arthur, Sir Bedivere is lamenting, he's lamenting that the Arthurian round table is coming to an end. Arthur solaces him, gives him solace or pacifies Sir Bedivere, saying this famous line, all of you know. He says that no, Sir Bedivere, change is the law of nature. He says, change is the law of nature. However noble a good system may be, it cannot exist for long. And that famous line I'd like to quote, the old order changes, yielding place to new, and God fulfills himself in many ways, lest one good custom should corrupt the world. The old order changes. This line is oft quoted. It's an oft quoted line of Tennyson. It fitly reflects the ideology. It fitly reflects the situation of those anguished time of change. Society was in the very act of assuming a new form, which was welcomed by some while lamented by others. Whichever way we look, we behold symptoms of change. The public mind has outgrown public institutions, which must soon be shattered unless possessed of flexibility uh, to admit a proportionate expansion. Politics, religion, education, in every field. To give some examples, all of you know, during when Tennyson began to write, so many legislative reforms took place, all of you know, so many. The repeal of the Corn Laws, anti-slavery law, passage of Poor Law Amendment, Education Act, Trade Union Act, Factory Act, what not, so many legislation. And all of you know the, the introduction of science, technology, and mechanization. Science, technology was there, it is welcome, but life became mechanized also. That became a point of grievance with the poets, with Tennyson, and with I mean this is very relevant to our poem Ulysses also. Ulysses is a voice against mechanization, heroism, even heart's desire of pursuing certain things must be there. We shall come to that later on. Industrial revolution, it began in the Romantic period, towards the end of the Romantic period, and it flourished, reached zenith during Victorian period. The Great Exhibition, the Great Exhibition, 1851, it was a great show of nationalism, great show of power. hmm? Chartist rebellion, all of you know, the Charter of Demands, the democratic rights, the Reform Act, all of you know, 1832. 1832 for the first time, Reform Act. Interestingly enough, Tennyson and the Cambridge Apostles group, to which I'll come later, I'll talk later, they were against Reform Act. They participated in what was happening around them. So the Reform Act, the Reform Bill 1832, and there are two other Reform Acts. Not that Reform Act provided something, people with something glorious. There is, I do not have time to discuss those things, but I say that Reform Act is not that glorious as it apparently seems to be. You know, and rise of the Whigs and the radicals, rise of the middle class, very important factor, all of you know. Influence of Benthamite and also of the Wordsworth circle, two circles, during that period. One Benthamite line, this is very important for our understanding. One Benthamite line and the other Coleridgean Wordsworthian line, and brilliant thinkers were born during that period. William Darwin, Charles Darwin, and John Stuart Mill, John Ruskin, Arnold, Morris, many thinkers. Naturally, it's not surprising that Victorian age was a great age of change, and it can be emphatically said. Brushing aside all harsh and unjust criticism, it can be said that Victorian poetry tried to grapple with the situation. Victorian poetry tried to raise questions, certain questions regarding the material situation that gripped England, regarding the complex situation that gripped England, gripped Victorian England during that time. Now, before coming, I have to come to the text. Before coming to text, I only very briefly I would mention of two circles. That is very important to our understanding. You know, Tennyson and Browning, they are the two major poets, all of you know. Arnold is there. Tennyson and Browning were constantly in dialogue. No direct confrontation, no direct attack, no direct opposition, no direct face-to-face meeting like that, debate like that. But they were constantly in dialogue. How? Through two institutions. Radical. The two institutions were trying in their own way. Their ideology was different, but the two institutions were trying in their own way to have their stamp in the mass culture, in the people of the society. They were trying to influence the times. They were trying to influence the ideology of the times. They were trying to influence the philosophy of the times. What are those two schools? Number one is monthly repository group. This is a less discussed one about these two schools. They are not taken into account usually. Uh, the monthly repository school, the monthly repository group, it is a journal actually, monthly repository unitary journal. In this journal, it was edited by and led by Mr. Fox, F.J. Fox. Mr. Fox led the journal, and Browning belonged to this group. Browning belonged to this journal. They were radicals. Another group or another coterie, literary coterie, I should say, prevailed in Cambridge. The name of that coterie is Cambridge Apostles. And it is to these Cambridge Apostles that Arthur Henry Hallam belonged. Not only Arthur Henry Hallam, some other great minds who belong to religion also, they also belong to that period. To mention one name, R.C. Trench, a great name. R.C. Trench, John Starling, F.J. Morris. So Trench, Starling, Morris, they were poets at the same time, prophets or men belonging to the church. This is very significant. These Cambridge Apostles, in Cambridge Apostles, these people from the church, people from poetry, people are great people who were practicing poetry and who were practicing religion at the same time. They were there in the Cambridge Apostles. And Cambridge Apostles, these two circles, interestingly, have been described by John Stuart Mill, who wrote The Subjugation of Women, all of you know. John Stuart Mill was all praise these two, formations. And he says that two concentric circles of the age, it is said by John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill says that the two concentric circles of the Victorian age, the monthly repository and the Cambridge Apostles, were spreading shocks across the land. They were spreading their own philosophy, their thoughts. They both wanted change in society, but in their own unique way. We do not have time to discuss the monthly repository ideology, but we are going to discuss in some detail at least upon or dwell in some detail upon the ideology of the of the Cambridge Apostles, to which both Hallam and Tennyson belonged. Arthur Henry Hallam was Tennyson's, what should I say, godfather will be less, best friend, and Tennyson followed Hallam in many ways. He's a descendant, it can be said. John Stuart Mill has described these two movements as two systems of concentric circles, I have said, monthly repository and the Cambridge Apostles. The former being the progressive Benthamite circle. Bentham, they followed, the monthly repository group followed Bentham, utilitarianism. And the later circle, that is Cambridge Apostles, they were conservative Coleridgean circle. So this must be understood. One, the line of Bentham, followed by monthly repository group, and the other line followed by the Cambridge Apostles is the line of conservative yet subversive. You must remember this. Conservative yet subversive. They also wanted social change, but in their own way. They were different from the political method, direct political method adopted by the monthly repositories, Coleridgean circle. They were two avant-garde groups experimenting with the new in political, theological, and aesthetic matters in poetry. These groups represent two quite different intellectual formations in the 1830s. Both were defining new categories and defamiliarizing the old. The way these groups conceptualize poetry and culture is fundamentally important to the nature of the Victorian poetry. Now, it is time to come to the text, but before that, please allow me to quote John Campbell. John Campbell was a poet and a priest. John Campbell, in a letter, said something about the Cambridge Epistles, and it is a wonderful summary of the philosophy of the Cambridge Epistles. Why I emphasize this? Because in order to understand the poem Ulysses, we need to philosophy of the ideology of the Cambridge Epistles. The ideology of Cambridge Epistles goes into the making of this poem. You know, direct influence of the philosophy. That's why I am emphasizing this. It is to read this, to learn about this, is to know the genesis of the poem, what goes into the making of the poem. So let me quote, please have patience to listen to what John Campbell in a letter says. He says, first feature of the Cambridge Epistles. All these features will be discussed while reading the poem. To devote to the great work of regenerating England. This is a great work. We have to সাহিত্যের একটা কি বলবো রেসপন্সিবিলিটি রয়েছে সমাজকে তোলার, that sort of thing. To devote to the great work of regenerating England, not by political institutions, but by a higher and holier work. Ki say higher and holier work? By breathing into her the vigorous feelings of a poet and a religious man. By pouring out the dull and stagnant blood which circulates in her vein, to replenish them with a youthful stream fresh from the heart. So, to fill the veins of society with blood which comes from the heart of poetry. Very, very important for understanding. This is purifying, purging society of certain evil elements and giving people the right spirit, the right frame of mind, the right heroic spirit is the theme of the poem Ulysses. You know, mind of the country, theme says, mind of the country cannot be changed through direct political change. Yes, they were against direct politics. Institutional reform is mechanistic and superficial. Purifying mind of the masses was very important, he says. The right kind of attitude should be nurtured in heart, not in politics. Poetry is an agent in this nurturing. Poetry was an important cultural agent of change that can rejuvenate consciousness without really bothering to change the structure of things. This is very important. So there will be a change, but the change will not be in the structure. The Cambridge Epistles did not want any revolution. No French revolution is required. Rather, they are worried about revolution. Revolution is not the political change, is not the solution. The Cambridge Epistles believes no structural change. They say the machinery of a poem is not less susceptible than the cotton mill. Very interesting comment. Cotton mill is important, but it is a machinery, definitely, and the machinery of poetry is no less important. It is said by John Thiem. They can disseminate principles. Poetry can disseminate principles. They can make these principles power over people's imagination. They can influence national feelings. All these. And Alan Sinfield, another famous critic and Victorian critic and Tennysonian critic, he said that the Cambridge Epistles celebrated democratization of literature. Literature must come to the masses. It must appeal to the common people. That is why, have a look, Tennyson is writing, when writing Ulysses, he is taking resort to myth. Why is he taking resort to myth? This is in consonance with, this is in harmony with this claim of the Cambridge Epistles, that as a poet you have to arrest the heart of people. You have to have your place in the imagination of the masses. This is very important. This ideology is important for our understanding of the poem. They celebrated democratization of literature so that it now belongs to the middle class. You have to approach the middle class. To them, art revealed an aristocracy of taste. It's all right. poetry is an aristocracy of taste, spiritual aristocracy, but the method of spreading it in society was middle class democratic method. You know, with these words, and only before taking up the text in right earnest, I'd like to talk about three characteristic paradoxes. You know, Victorian paradox, all of you know, three characteristic Victorian paradoxes of the age. The first paradox is they wanted change, but they were afraid of change. Some people took advantage of the dynamic state. Some people took advantage of the machines of industrial growth. But those people who belong to lower middle class, when they went to the upper social rung, they were apprehensive that people who are down, people who are below may come up, may take their position. Very peculiar kind of feeling. They took advantage of the situation and they progressed, but they did not want other people to progress, because then the hierarchy will be broken. So there was dynamism. People wanted change, availed themselves of the change, but they feared change. This is one of the Victorian paradox. Another Victorian paradox is between science and progress. People praised science. That is why Browning was so well read. Darwin was so popular. Darwin's book became famous. So many copies were sold. So people loved science, people loved progress, people loved the relativity of science. No one is born to his or her own place. No one is in fixed. You know, science emphasizes empiricism, relativism, but at the same time, people said that this relativism, this empiricism of science will lead to uncertainty, will lead to shaking of faith. That is another. So you are desiring science, you want advancement, you want progress, you want technology, but you are apprehensive about the uncertainties taking place. This is another characteristic Victorian change. It is there, very much there. You can well understand if you have read the poem. From a cursory reading of the poem, it will be apparent that the poem Ulysses is embedded in this ideology, in this tendency, peculiar tendency. And the last one, the clash between science and religion. Between doubt and faith. You know, Darwin's book, not only Darwin, there were some other books also. That famous two books, George Lill, another book. I forget. Yes, I got it. Sir Charles Lill. Sorry, Sir Charles Lill. The name of the book is Principles of Geology. It was published when Tennyson began to write. You know, Darwin's The Origin of Species were published in 1859 later. But this book, Sir Charles Lyell's Principles of Geology, I especially mention this book. And another book, Robert Chambers, Vestiges of the Natural History of Creation. Robert Chambers' book, Vestiges of the Natural History of Creation. They paved the way for Darwin. That is important. They paved the way for Darwin. They paved the way for science. They paved the way for that sort of attitude, science. You know, when Darwin said that man has not been created by God, biblical truth is not the right kind of truth. When Darwin said that no special position should be given to man, because man come from that quadruped and hairy arboreal creatures. This was a huge shock to the complacency nurtured by people, to the complacency as human being nurtured by the people in the age. So there was confrontation, there was clash between doubt and faith. These are the three great Victorian paradoxes. Clash between, change desired and change feared. Clash between relativism and uncertainty. Clash between science and religion. Clash between doubt and faith. Clash between progressivism and determinism. all these philosophies. These are the characteristic features of Victorian age. I must take up the text, otherwise it won't be able to cover the text. So, coming to the text of Ulysses, first of all, I'd like to come to the title, Ulysses, the myth. Ulysses myth has been, it's a very popular myth. Why? Why? First, the first question is, he is borrowed both to Homer and to Dante. This is known, that I'm not discussing in detail, because in Homer, you do not have that final journey, cessation of life, that sighting the Mount Purgatory, crossing the border, that sort of thing which Ulysses wants to do in the poem. Is this clue is not there in Homer's Odyssey. It is there in Dante's Inferno. So some critics are of the opinion that the poem is indebted more to Dante than to Homer's Odyssey. So now the question is, it is more or less known, but the question is, why Ulysses, why Tennyson, had chosen to focus on myth, and why Ulysses myth? That I want to know. That I'd like to discuss, to read with you. Myth has the capacity to 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 uh, to impress, to influence, to have impact upon popular imagination. Myth is part of popular culture. That is why, very strategically, even in consonance with the ideology of the apostles, he has chosen Ulysses. Ulysses myth was very popular. James Joyce also, later times, James Joyce also has written Ulysses, his famous novel. So Ulysses myth, Arthurian myth, all these were very and very, very popular in England. And he knew that in order to reach people, in order to uh, have an impact upon the mind of the people, upon the heart of the people, in order to arrest the heart of the masses, in order to drive home my philosophy of life, I have to reach the masses, and myth is a means of reaching the masses. Myth has the capacity to to endear something to the masses. That is why he has taken resort to this popular myth. And Homer, Hallam is a presence in this poem. Let me say this. Arthur Henry Hallam is an abiding influence upon Lord Alfred Tennyson. When the poem was written, Tennyson was in a very anguished kind of state. Excuse me, I'm just now. Very sorry. During this time, what happened, in Tennyson's life when he wrote the poem, that he was in a very, very desolate state of mind. His friend Arthur Henry Hallam died, without whom he could not imagine his life. He was an abiding influence. He accepted his philosophy, and when his poems, chiefly lyrical, was published, it was much praised and supported by Arthur Henry Hallam. And not only that, after Hallam's death, his father also died at the same time. When father died, he had to give up. Tennyson had to give up his education at Cambridge, Trinity College, and come back home. There were 11 children in the family. Mother was living. He had to take responsibility of his family. And it seemed that in family, when in the family, his poetic spirit seemed to be cramped. He understood that life is coming to a standstill. He understood that he cannot progress. He understood that his prospect of being poet is not going to be realized. He understood that his potentiality is not going to be realized, translated into reality. Very, very apprehensive state of mind. He didn't know what to do. Loss of father, loss of, not only that, in his family, there was a problem. What was the problem? His father, he belonged to a landed gentry, not aristocrats, but they had land, conservative state of mind. But his grandfather, Tennyson's grandfather, this inherited Tennyson's father. It created problem. His uh, father became a psycho. There was a neurotic problem in the family. And Tennyson, in Tennyson, you find a confrontation between these two. I mean, old order, conservative gentry, and the middle class, the ideology of industry, the ideology of progressivism. So determinism, progressivism is there in Tennyson's life and family also. So these things were there, and that is why before writing the poem, I mean about the poem, Tennyson in a memoir said that there is more of about myself. This is a famous quotation of Tennyson. This is a famous saying of Tennyson himself about the poem. This is very important for our understanding of the poem Ulysses. We have to remember this always, because this has been said by the poet. Yes, that does not mean that the poem will be understood in terms of what the poet says. That is not supportable. But we must keep in mind, it is imperative that you keep in mind these words of Tennyson. He said that there is more about myself in Ulysses, which was written under the sense of loss, and that all had gone by, but that still life must be fought out to the end. What an irony. He is saying that it has been written under a sense of loss, that everything is going away, everything is falling apart, things fall apart. He says it was more written with the feeling of loss upon me than many other poems. But it is in the poem that Ulysses, that instead of talking about loss, instead of speaking about loss, he rather is speaking about progress, how to move forward, how to go forward, the heroic, the right kind of attitude. Actually, why? The poet is in a state of depression caused by so many deaths caused by his family, but still he is talking of, he is speaking of, he's trying to highlight the ideology of the philosophy of progress and heroic idealism. Why? Because poetry is therapeutic, because poetry helps him to combat with life. So this is very interesting, I mean, observation made by Tennyson about his own poem. Now let us understand the poem. What does the poet says in the poem? At the outset, and I have already said that this apparently simple poem, this is an apparently simple poem, but is not at all simple. This is a poem of heroic idealism. And this in recent years, this poem of heroic idealism, apparently simple poem, has been subject to great changes and has been subject to great discussion, scholarly discussion. The aged title character Ulysses outlines his plans to abandon his dreary kingdom of Ithaca to reclaim lost glory in a final adventure on the seas, he says. So I have to reclaim lost glory. Ulysses has come back home. He feels that I must not stay here. Let us read the text. It little profits that an idle king, by this still hearth among these barren crags, matched with an aged wife, I meet and dole unequal laws unto a savage race. I will come to this. So, it little profits that an idle king. So, idle king. What is the utility of being an idle king? The word idle is also reminiscent of that time when people, taking advantage of industry, taking advantage of progress, were wallowing in wealth and become idle. Tennyson is against this philosophy of I mean, against this tendency of idleness, against this tendency of wallowing in wealth and comfort. This is not good for life, idle king. By this steel heart, the word steel is reminiscent of Cambridge apostles because the steel means no sensation. But Cambridge apostles said life must be, there must be a life of sensation, very intense kind of life, blood flowing through heart, that sort of life. So steel hearth, hearth, it is an enclosure. It stands for domesticity, symbol for the thing symbolized. Steel hearth, coming to rhetoric, symbol for the thing symbolized. Metonymy. So outgrown customs. What is the utility of these remaining or handling these things? What is the utility of remaining by the hearth among these barren cracks? Think of the word barren. Really, Ithaca was barren. But yes, one must remember that Ithacan island in Odyssey has not been described like that. So here he wants to say that the Ithacan island is barren, it's a craggy land where cultivation is not possible, and the mines are barren. So metaphorically and figuratively, barren crags, matched with an aged wife. You know, uh, this is very, very important. This steel hearth and aged wife. Now, steel hearth, this rejection of hearth, this rejection of domesticity, this rejection of a scorn of his aged wife, this has been a bone of contention. Critics have criticized these things vociferously because in Victorian age, home was a loved space, is a loved private space. Why does Tennyson scorn his wife, and why does Tennyson, reject home? In actually, Linda Hughes, one eminent Victorian critic, she has argued that this rejection of home is uncharacteristic, a typical feature of the poem. It is right. But this atypical, uncharacteristic feature of the poem comes from his personal situation. Linda says that the situation of stagnation, as described here by Ulysses, parallels the situation in his own life. That is why he rejects home. This is the opinion of Linda, biographical kind of interpretation he has given. So, matched with an aged wife. Why? He is rejecting his wife, aged wife. In Victorian times, there were two spheres, the masculine and the feminine. Home was the sphere of women, home was the sphere of morality. They were called angelic creatures. Women were called angelic creatures. So, why is he directing? Ulysses is directing his scorn towards his wife. This has been criticized by many, matched with an aged wife. Once again, Linda defends it, saying that it can be ascribed to the condition, peculiar kind of condition he was in. Now, the word aged wife, psychoanalytic critics have given a new interpretation. They say that the word aged, the term aged, is reflective of lost female body, no more appealing. Perhaps Ulysses is suffering from some psychological problems. He is not feeling interest in his aged wife, quote unquote aged, not so appealing. The female body is here being, both feminist and psychoanalyst, they support this interpretation, is being relegated to the secondary position. Aged wife, I meet and dole is meet out, give, meet and dole, unequal laws unto a savage race. Which I think one thing I forgot to mention, that some say that this rejection of wife and rejection of family atmosphere is a kind of not participation, but it's a kind of fleeing, sarking, avoiding responsibility. That is why some ironist critics are there. They find irony in the poem and they say that instead of being a poem of participation, it is a poem of fleeing, it is a poem It is a poem of avoiding responsibility. It creates a divide, the ironist critics say. So the ironist critics, the psychoanalytic critics, the feminists, many of them, many of the critics, attack Tennyson on such grounds. And feminists say that this rejection of the aged wife is a love of Tennyson's love of phallus. Ulysses's love of phallus is a paradigmatic instance of material signifier. Phallus is the paradigmatic instance of material signifier. And so he says that this rejection of his wife, I mean, this aspect of the poem has not been taken, I mean, with a grain of salt, has been taken with a grain of salt. So I meet and dole unequal laws unto a savage race. Now, these unequal laws, this is the topical allusion. Unequal means, discriminatory law. Unequal means fitting different situation. A law must be equal under every situation. But this was a discriminatory law. Yes. Is it a tacit criticism of the Victorian attitude? During Victorian period, there were so many legislations. Let me give one example. Anti-slavery law. Anti-slavery law was, came into force in England. But it's a matter of regret. You'll be surprised to learn that anti-slavery law was not in force in the colonies of England. In India, Ceylon, Sri Lanka, no, this was not applicable. So double standard. The same law is applicable to one place, but to another place, to other people, this is not. To home people, this law is applicable. To other people, colonized people, this is not applicable. So unequal laws, it might be a tacit criticism of the Victorian legal, legislation, unequal laws unto a savage race. So once again, hating those people, savage race. Now, the colonial, those who support colonial interpretation, post-colonial interpretation of the poem, that they say that this savage race, actually Ulysses is a colonizer. The word savage is reflective of that sneering attitude towards the natives. The word savage connotes that sort of thing. And they say that it is suggestive of a split in psychology. Split in the psychology of Ulysses. He's a colonial ruler and he cannot love his own people. That is why split in psychology. The king cannot love his own people, own race. Psychological problem. The word savage is reminiscent of his colonial sneer. And Robbins, another critic, says that actually he opposes the colonial reading and says that no, the word savage does not mean the colonies, people in the colonies, the natives. Rather, it means the people of England who became savage, in a metaphorical sense, in the industrial England, people lost their heart, people lost their mind. There was mindless wallowing in wealth. That savagery is being, as Arnold was criticizing that aspect, So Carlyle was criticizing that aspect. So that Carlyle and that Arnoldian aspect has been referred to by the word savage. Robin, a critic that Robbins says, I said about Robin, that hoard and sleep and feed and know not me. These people, they only hoard and sleep and feed and know not me. This is reminiscent of Hamlet. It is an allusion to Hamlet. What is a man if his chief time and the market of his plate be but to sleep and feed? A beast, no more. The lines are reminiscent of Hamlet. Yes, he is very proud here. No, not me. The expression no, not me means two things. No, not me means people will not know themselves. These savage people of Ithaca, will not try to translate their hidden power into reality. These people, they will not participate in progress. At the same time, no, not me means they will not know, they will not try to understand their king. Such a great king I am, Ulysses, he says. So no, not me has double meaning. that hoard and sleep and feed. Look at the figure of speech, policy in Dayton. What function policy in Dayton serves here? That boredom with existence, that problem with life, that sameness, has been conveyed through policy in Dayton. That hoard and sleep and feed and know not me. And again, coming to hoard and sleep and feed, all these are metaphors. Hoarding, a hoarder, a miserly person only hoards and hoards. He earns, the person earns, miserly person, but cannot enjoy his own wealth. So hoarding cannot translate his own wealth in terms of enjoyment. So man's potentiality remain unrealized if people hoard themselves. If people do not participate in life, hoard and sleep, metaphorical sleep and feed and know not me. Uh, Before moving on to the next famous line, I would like to mention one thing. Is it a dramatic monologue? Had it been a classroom situation, I know that every student would say, yes, sir, it is a dramatic monologue. But as a dramatic monologue, it poses a problem. I give you to think, I would ask you to think this. How can it be a dramatic monologue? I also accept that it's a dramatic monologue, but think of the problems first. Whom is he addressing here? Telemachus? No, not present here. His wife Penelope? Not present here. And near the hearth, there cannot be the, mariners. Definitely the mariners, his followers are not there. Whom is he addressing here? The first and foremost feature of a dramatic monologue is the presence of silent auditor. Who is the silent auditor? And if you note that there is a problem of setting also, not only the problem of auditor. Another problem is that the problem of setting. Who is? Where has it been set? It has been set at different places. It is at first near the hearth, and towards the end of the poem, it is near the port, and at the end of the poem, it is on the board of a ship. You will find. So there is problem of setting. There is problem of audience. Auditor in the poem. That's why, as a dramatic monologue, it is not as perfect as as Browning's dramatic monologue. There are certain problems. Still, a dramatic voice is the beginning is very dramatic. I admit. So we will discuss this aspect of the poem. Then show rejecting family, rejecting home space. So he plans to abandon his dear kingdom and takes recourse to travel. He says that travel is the right option for me. It is the right choice for me. I am born for travel. And that famous line, which you love very much. I cannot rest from travel. I will drink life to the lees. Remember, this line, I need not mention that there is metaphor. The travel metaphor is one of the central metaphors in the poem. Is one of the central metaphors, travel metaphor. So I cannot rest from travel. I will drink life to the lees. Have a look. Why is loving travel? Because travel offers him continuity. Buckley and Carr, another critic, Buckley and Carr, two critics, they say that this travel, he identifies himself with travel because it offers him continuity. The theme of continuity will surface when we come to the image of the arch later on. I will come to the theme of continuity later on. So continuity is important. He wants to maintain continuity. And he wants travel because he is a lover of progressivism, progressive attitude, progressive Victorian attitude. He again the colonial critics say that he wants travel because he wants to confiscate others' properties. He wants to possess others' land. Varieties of interpretation. Rereading the poem is like this. So colonial interpretation says that this travel is something different. Not only that, the people who support post-colonial criticism, who read the poem from colonial perspective, they say that this is not a great line. We love the line, we people. As a student also, I love this line. I cannot rest from travel. I will drink life to the lees. It sounds great. Look at the rhythm, the enervated rhythm, beautiful, right? But the colonial supporters of colonial criticism, they say that it holds up, it foregrounds a consumerist attitude. I will drink life to the lees. I will not share the wine with anyone. To the lees, even the residual part will be enjoyed by me. So, psychological problem also, not sharing with anyone, he's saying. So, this has been, I mean, according to conventional interpretation, this is a great line. It's a great metaphor, travel metaphor, roaming metaphor, moving forward, going ahead in life, and discovering more and more, discovering new lands, থাকবো না কো বদ্ধ করে দেখবো এবার জগৎটাকে, that sort of emotion. But the psychoanalytic critics, but the colonial readers, they say, I mean colonialist reading, they say that this is a consumerist attitude. It's a split in his mind, he says. I cannot lease, you know, I will drink life to the lees. Lees means dregs, the last drop. After this, Ulysses contrasts his present restlessness with the eventful past. He says that I am not an ordinary man. You know, my past is a glorious past, he says. At times I have enjoyed greatly, have suffered greatly, both with those that loved me and alone that loved me. You know, this again, Linda Hughes says that the word loved me is reminiscent of, you know, the loved one. I mean, Arthur Henry Hallam, who is no more. Look at the past tense. The line is locked in past tense. That loved me. Who loved him? Actually, Linda Hughes says that this is an oblique reference to Arthur Henry Hallam, who is no more. That loved me and alone. And here by the word loved, Ulysses is trying to present himself as a benevolent leader, well loved of the people. People loved him as he alone. On shore, he suffered on shore, and when through scudding means a vaporous cloud, through scudding drifts the rainy hyads. It is taken from rainy hyads in allusion to Enid. What is rainy hyad? It's a V-shaped cluster of stars, not Y-shaped. Some people say Y-shaped cluster of stars. V-shaped cluster of stars presaging rain. If it arises, if it is seen with the sun, then you can be sure that there will be rain and storm. So during storm, during good season, favorable time, during bad times, hard times, he fought, Ulysses says. Through scudding drifts the rainy hyads, you know, so allusion to vex the dim sea. The colonialist critics say, colonial critics, they say the word vexed. It is reminiscent of vexation spirit, vexation of spirit, you know. So this, this vexed state of mind of Ulysses is a reminder of his psychological split and his vexation of spirit in, a person who wants to possess the land of others. Huh? So, wakes the dim sea. I am become a name, he says. I am become a name. That has been interpreted differently. I am become a name means I have become a name. I have become a famous person. He wants to say Ulysses is no small name. Ulysses is a great name. That he wants to say. But there have been some other interpretations. You know, the ironists say that it is a vain claim to which nobody listens. Who is listening to him, they say. It is self-reflective. It is getting echoed and re-echoed and coming back to himself, he says. And Linda says that this I am become a name, this project is a project of the fear of Tennyson himself. Why? Tennyson, when he wrote the poem, he had become a name. Poems chiefly lyrical was published. He earned the Chancellor's Gold Medal Award, Timbuktu, the poem he wrote with this poem. So he became a name when Hallam was present. But when Hallam is absent, Hallam is no more, how will he progress? Will his name be meaningless? So this aspect, this biographical aspect of Tennyson, he is afraid of not translating his power as a poet into reality, whether he will be able to write anymore or not. The family situation is there also. I have already spoke about that. All these things, That's why Linda Hughes has said that I am become a name. It may be an apprehension, fear of Tennyson. But the legendary aspect, as a whole, the poem is foregrounding the legendary aspect. I am become a name means I have become a living legend. For always roaming with a hungry heart, roaming, once again travel metaphor, hungry heart alliteration. What does what purpose does alliteration serve here? A hungry heart means this Coleridge's, I mean this colonial desire, some say, to earn something, to loot something, to plunder something from others' country and bring home, bring to one's own country. Hungry heart. So hungry heart, we understand the conventional interpretation is that hungry heart is the heart's desire to learn more and more, to experience more and more, to gather more and more experience. But there are some other interpretations. This colonial is a hungry heart. The word hungry is reminiscent of consumerist attitude in previous line. So it is but nevertheless, this roaming central metaphor. And really, he roamed with Arthur Henry Hallam. He went to Europe with his friend Hallam. Tennyson went. This is a biographical touch also. Went to Europe, went to Germany and France for some reason, revolutionary reason, wanted to help the revolutionaries. And they went there, Tennyson and Hallam both. So this roaming also reminiscent of that. Much have I seen and known, he says. Much have I seen and known. Think of the inverted syntax. Abundance of experience. The inversion is functional here. The inversion suggests abundance of experience. Much have I seen and known. Cities of men and manners, climates, councils, governments, myself not least. Very important. His concern with council, government. Why? As a as an indomitable quester, he cannot forget governments and councils. This is reminiscent of a colonizing attitude. A colonizer is very conscious of how he will rule a certain territory. What will be the council? What will be the government? And how will they acclimatize there, cope with the climate there? These sort of colonial concerns are there, is very much in the mind of Ulysses. So they say that like Homer's Ulysses, who was in a sense colonizer and dominating person, I mean, he is a colonizer. Myself not least. Yes, this is very significant line. That is, journey is two-way. Journey allows you to know yourself. Through adventure, through journey, you know what you are. You become aware of your own potentialities. At the same time, journey allows you to know others. So knowing others is important. If you want to dominate others, you have to have knowledge. Knowledge is power in that sense, Foucauldian sense. So both way it can be interpreted. That two-way self-discovery and at the same time stamping your identity upon the identity of others. Both interpretations might be there, myself not least. And drunk delight of battle with my peers, far on the ringing plains of windy Troy. How wonderful line. Drunk delight of battle, once again alliteration and metaphor together. Drunk delight of battle. Drink delight, I mean drinking metaphor. Pleasure of, some people will say that yes, this alliteration and metaphor together will highlight, foreground the pleasure of plunder and confiscation. The belligerent mood of the explorer has been foregrounded here. They say, drunk delight of battle with my peers. And not only that, far on the ringing plains of windy Troy. Here also you find so many figures of speech. Ringing, windy, onomatopoeic words. And Troy, allusion. And ringing plains of windy Troy. Plain, it is an example of synecdoche, whole for the part. The battle was not fought across the plain. The Trojan War was fought near the coastal region. So far on the ringing plains of windy Troy, here you have allusion, here you have onomatopoeia, you have synecdoche with all these. I mean, this Troy is the ancient city in Asia Minor, besieged by the Greeks during the Trojan War. all these figures of speech add to the sense of urgency, immediacy, as if the battle is going on, you know. So that sort of reading should be there. Now, he says that despite this eventful, glorious past, I still want more and more experience. I am a part of all that I have met, he says. 10 minutes more, please. Please allow me 10 minutes more. I am a part of all that I have met, he says, very important. He says that I am a part of all that I have met. He has met, biographical interpretation by Linda. He has met Hallam and he has become a part of Hallam. Hallam is his alter ego. This is one interpretation. At the same time, another interpretation is that it is reminiscent of Byron's line, Childe Harold's pilgrimage. You know, I live not in myself, but I become portion of that around me. Very famous line. I live not in myself, but I become portion of that around me. That's why he says, I am part of that I have met. So it is reminiscent of Wordsworth. Wordsworth also in Tintin Abbey says, what we half create and half perceive. What you see, to participate in nature, to see the rose is to create the rose with your mind's light, that sort of. So Byron's thinking, Wordsworthian thinking goes into the I am part of all that I have made. He simply wants to say that I was so absorbed in my experience that I had become a part of the object. I participated wholeheartedly, he wants to say. Still, he says, yet all experience is an arch where to gleams that untraveled world whose margin fades forever and forever when I move. This arch image has been a problem with the students. Yet all experience is an arch. What is arch? You know, my interpretation is that you will say, or in different books you find, arch is the meeting place where the sky and the earth meet. You want to touch that point, you can never touch that point. Arch may also mean the meeting place, the spot, that spot where the ocean and the sky meet. You reach with your boat, you reach that spot, you find that it is not there. Knowledge is like that. This is the simple interpretation. Knowledge is like that. You want to end the end of knowledge, you try to reach that point, but you cannot. The more you go, the more you learn that knowledge is limitless. This is the usual interpretation. But I would like to say that the image of arch is integrated to the heart of the poem, is integrated to what Ulysses says and to the Cambridge apostles. Arch. Think of an arch. If you draw a vertical line at the middle point of an arch, there are two symmetrical sides. One side, Ulysses has already completed from the beginning till the highest point. He has come to his family life. He has come back once again. So one part of the arch is complete. And the arch will become full. Arch will attain completeness if from that highest point he once again undertakes a marriage. Undertakes an adventure. So this arch is the only means of fulfillment, completing the half circle. Arch, very important, image. Continuum. Now this maintaining continuum is very important to the Cambridge apostles, because Cambridge apostles, to which Hallam and Tennyson belong, they believed that there must not be any structural change. Cambridge apostles believed that the structure should be there. Telemachus should rule the land. Ithaca should be there. There must not be revolution. But the structure will be there, but there will be certain administrative changes. Maintaining continuum was a part of their ideology, part of the ideology of apostles. And he imbibed. This arch image is reflective of the continuum desired by Ulysses and desired by Tennyson also for his own country. So this metaphor, this arch half circle is very significant. That glimpse untraveled, once again traveled metaphor, whose margin fades forever and forever when I move. So Hamlet, this is reminiscent of Hamlet once again. The undiscovered country, Hamlet says, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns. How dull it is to pause, he says, to make an end, to rust unburnished, not to shine in use, as though to breathe their life, he says. So, how dull it is to pause, to make an end, he says. You cannot make an end. How can you keep the sword? Here you have this famous sword metaphor. It is a eloquent demonstration against the stagnation in England. And Cambridge apostles wanted to speak against that stagnation in England. National stagnation, people wallowing in wealth, so much of comfort owing to industrial growth. So he says that how can you keep your spirit shut? How can you keep your spirit shut or in its sheath? Like a sword. A sword, if it is kept for a long time in its sheath, accumulates rust. And our self also loses its edge if it is not exercised in life. He says, very, very significant sword metaphor, I think. And it is also reminiscent of a companion piece, the Lotus Eaters, the choric song, the antithetical attitude. It is said that choric song and Ulysses are companion poems. In the choric song, he harbors, Tennyson nurtures. The mariners in the choric song nurtures the just opposite kind of hedonist attitude. That leisurely life is to be enjoyed in a leisurely and pleasurely manner. That sort of attitude is there in the choric song, the Lotus Eater choric song written by Tennyson himself. So here, just the opposite view of life you find. As though to breathe their life. And I'm reminded of another famous line from Troilus and Cressida. This is reminiscent of that famous line of Troilus and allusion to that. Perseverance, my lord. I'm quoting from Troilus and Cressida. Perseverance, my lord, keeps honor bright. To have done is to hang. To have done is to hang. Quite out of fashion, like a rusty mail. MAIL mail means bormo, protective guard. In monumental mockery, he says. As though to breathe their life, life piled on life were all too little, and of one to me little remains. But every hour is safe from that eternal silence. Something more, a bringer of new things. And vile it were for some 3 suns to store and hoard myself, and this grey spirit yearning in desire to follow knowledge like a sinking star. This has been, discussed greatly by the critics. To follow knowledge like a sinking star. A sinking star, even when it is below the horizon, it radiates light. A person, Ulysses wants to say that he wants to follow knowledge till the last moment of his life. It is reflective of his keen desire to gather experience till the last moment. The heroic, right kind of heroic spirit of the Cambridge apostles you find here. This heroic attitude to follow knowledge like a sinking star. To reach something for the unreachable. Definitely, a romantic touch is there. Tennyson and Hallam both loved Shelley, both loved Byron. The only way to limit the combats of self is by reaching for something unreachable. And you remember that famous line by Shelley, "Lines to an Indian air." This line reminds me of that. You may say that it alludes to that line. The desire of the moth for the star, of the night for the morrow, the devotion of something far apart from the sphere of our sorrow. So this sort of touch is there to follow knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bound of human thought. Now this has once again become, the ironist critics say that Ulysses always is trying to go beyond. It is no middle flight. He's going to reaching out to the extreme, which is death, they say. So the ironist critics say that is it a journey to death? Is it that at his heart of hearts, Ulysses is thinking of death, dissolution of life, the final meeting point? You may take it both ways. The ironist critics are reading like that, and the conventional way of reading. So Ulysses, I'll skip this section, Telemachus. What is he saying? I'll summarize this, then go to the next section. He says that my son Telemachus will rule the land. I will leave the scepter and the isle to him. He is discerning, means he has judgment enough. He has the power to rule the people, discerning to fulfill. He will pay meet adoration to household gods. So think of the strategy of Ulysses, the strategy of the ideal of the Cambridge apostles, maintaining the status quo, maintaining continuum. He will explore, he will go to explore, he will discover new and new lands, as the Victorians did, really. So he will discover newer lands, newer territories, but his son will rule his people. This is the, in another way, the ironist critic will say, this is the way a colonialist do. He sends a viceroy to rule, or he sends his representative rule the colony, and the colonizers roam to different land in search of new territories. It works. And he comes to this conclusion. He works his work, I mine. This is very antithetical line, antithesis, but this antithesis is very, very functional. It is reflective of the contradictory desire for stability and change. He works his work and I mine. So he works his work means he will maintain stability. So desire for stability of the Cambridge apostles, desire for no structural change of the Cambridge apostles. I mine means I will explore, desire for change. So both, this is, Linda says this is an epiphanic line, according to Linda Hughes's epiphany. It summarizes the resolution. He understands finally that no use criticizing my son or my wife. No use criticizing Telemachus, because Telemachus also his appointed duty, and I have my own duty. So it is a kind of division of labor. I will do my work and he will do his work. Linda Hughes says that it is epiphany. No psychological split here, he says. But we understand that this line, this antithesis in the line, is suggestive of the dual purpose of the Cambridge apostles. The purpose of maintaining stability as well as to explore. So in the final section, thank you for being so patient. Allow me 5 minutes only. So in the final section, he says, there lies the sport. It is in the final section that all the discrepancies of a dramatic monologue is removed. In the final section, he really addresses the mariners. Come, my friends, he says. Come, my friends, and smite the sounding furrows. As if he is very near. He is having a look at the sea. He is on the board of a ship, as if it seems. So there lies the port, the vessel puffs her sail. There gloom the dark, broad seas. My mariners, souls that have toiled and wrought and thought with me, that ever with a frolic welcome took the thunder and sunshine. Thunder and sunshine. Thunder symbolizes good time, evil time, bad time, hard times, and sunshine, good time. Oppose free hearts, free forays. You and I are old, yet old age hath yet his honor and his toil. So nice, philosophy of kind of very, very ennobling kind of thought. Old age hath yet its honor and its toil. Death closes all. Nice philosophy. But something at the end, before a death, something, some work of noble note may yet be done. Now the ironistic said, why are you thinking of death? You are thinking of life, you are thinking of dynamism, you are thinking of a new travel. Why are you always over conscious of that? So that is why the ironist critic said that it is a subtle, equivocal, dramatic monologue in which the speaker, who is speaking of adventure, who is speaking of life, also is holding death in his left hand, always thinking of death. That sort of ambiguity is there. That sort of dual interpretation is there in the poem. That is why I said that is no simple poem, not unbecoming, litotis, not unbecoming, affirming. It is becoming, becoming of heroic hearts. not unbecoming men that strow with gods. In the final section, he says, the lights begin to twinkle from the rocks. You know, the beacon of light. I am reminded of the poem Seafarer. The lights begin to twinkle from the rocks. The call of the sea, the beacon of the sea. The long day wanes, the slow moon climbs the deep. The L sound is suggestive of languor. L sound is suggestive of, indolence, as we find in the choric song Lotus Eater. The message is here is dynamism going forward, but the lines, the rhythm, the rhyme go in a different direction. The alliteration go in a different direction. Hence, there is a clash. The tone, the what he wants to say, and the movement of the lines are quite different. The long day wanes, the slow moon climbs the deep. The deep moans around the many voices. Come, my friends, it's not too late to seek a newer world. Push off and sitting well in order, smite the sounding furrows. For my purpose holds to sail beyond the sunset and the baths of all the western stars. We are reminded of Dante definitely. This account is not there in Homer's Ulysses. This is in Dante. And ironist critics, E.D.H. Johnson, Clyde D. Riles, they say that Ulysses holds death in one form or the other. So this journey is a journey to death. This is in a ironic interpretation of the poem. They always hammer upon that point. And but he says to sail beyond the sunset and the baths of all the western stars until I die. It may be that the gulfs will wash us down. It may be that we shall touch the happy isles. Once again, happy isles, Elysium, Alison to Elysium. It's Elysium is a place where noble people, noble hearts, noble souls go. But ironist critic, for example, Chison, Chison, he says that it is hell. Elysium is actually hell. Dante, according to Dante, it is hell, he says. So, it may be that we shall touch the happy isles. Actually, happy isles is Elysium. It is what is paradise is to the Christians, Elysium is to the Greek people, classical people. And see the great Achilles. Achilles is the greatest hero. His armor was given. Achilles' armor was given to Ulysses. So it means this is symbolic transfer. Try to understand it. Achilles' armor was given to Ulysses, and Ulysses is making a mention of Achilles. So following the heroic path, once again stressed, following a heroic path, heroic heart. And see great Achilles, whom he knew. Though much is taken, much abides. The nice antithesis here. Though much is taken, much abides. The antithesis has been both ways. Some people say the emphasis is on much is taken. There is little left. Only residual power is there. Ironist critics say much is taken. And some people say, no, much abides. There is much to bank upon. You may take your own way. You may interpret in your own way. But this antithesis, this thesis, antithesis, synthesis must be there. So thesis and antithesis. Though much is taken, some people say much is taken. There is little left in Ulysses. Some people say that much remains. Though much is taken, much abides. We are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven. That which we are, he says. It's a very Satan. You are reminded of Satan's speech, Satan said that, forget about heaven, which we are. We have to find out new ways. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. That famous speech, That which we are. We have residual power, but this power is enough. Even old age, in old times, people can do something. One equal temper of heroic hearts. At last, we come to the heart of the poem. This is the heroic heart. Coming to the Cambridge Apostles, ideology of the Cambridge Apostles. One equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will. Once again reminded of Satan. Once again, I'm reminded of the wonderful modulation of verse, this stately tone. Think of the blank verse, how nice it is. It is suggestive of an indwelling strength, not ironic. I don't think the final lines are ironic. There might be many interpretations, psychological, psychological reading. There might be feminist reading, psychoanalytic reading, and ironic reading might be there. But this line, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, the modulation of hearts. I mean, it is suggestive of some indwelling essence, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Tennyson himself wants this. Tennyson himself was in a situation of crisis. Biographical touches there. He himself wants to write more and more poetry. He wants life. To strive, to seek, to find. The last line once again goes to the Cambridge Apostles. That high romantic view nurtured by Coleridge and Wordsworth. Tennyson belongs to that line. He does not belong to utilitarian line of utilitarianism. Uh, uh, yes, and this climax, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. You find this climactic line. It is, you find climax, at the same time antithesis is there, not to yield. So climax and antithesis. So it's a final resolution. At least at the end of the poem, this ironic interpretation is not possible. You really believe what it says. So this I thank you very much for patient hearing. I have overstepped my time. I beg apologies for that. Sorry.
From the bottom of my heart, I thank Dr. Debdas Rai for such a captivating and absorbing talk. Sir, your talk was indeed a fascinating and enriching one.
Thank
This
you.
is
Thank
evident
you.
welcome, sir. This is evident from the numerous comments and questions we have received from the participants. But due to constraints of time, we shall not be able to take all these questions. We shall be taking some of these questions and present these questions to Dr. Debdas Rai for answer. May I now request my colleague, Professor Shobhan Maiti, to select these questions and present to Dr. Rai. Over to you, Shobhan.
Thank you, sir. That's the first question I would like to select, and it will be there on your screen, sir. It's from Moumita Das. Please criticize on the vision of housekeeping sentiment of Ulysses. Okay.
Yes, that's very topical, Alison. This housekeeping sentiment was very much there in Victorian England. Victorian people loved women to remain at home. Home was the moral center. They respected family. Now, you may say that during that period, that sort of dynamic attitude that women in participate all spheres of life was not there. But that housekeeping sentiment of Tennyson, he could not overcome his age's tendency. He couldn't challenge that tendency. I admit that, but it is typically Victorian. But this rejection of home is also atypical, I can say, because home was respected by Victorian people. This housekeeping sentiment of Ulysses, I mean, he is not meant for house. Other people will keep the house. Other people will maintain stability, but I will explore. That sort of mentality is there. There is one may agree or one may not, but it is true to the Victorian spirit. And yet in this regard, at least Victorian, Ulysses could not radically challenge the ideology of the age. I accept it.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Another question from Sagnik Mukherjee, and his question is, sir, can Tennyson's poem be described as embedded in the nascent modernism, since it is full of psychological doubts and confusion and an eagerness for progress and dynamism, sir?
Right. So many critics. I quoted from Tobin, and Linda and Armstrong. They have said what you have said, Sagnik. So many critics have said that nascent, embedded in nascent modernism. Yes, it is there. That spirit, if you read Tennyson properly, if that sort of bias is gone, if the modernist critics, stop stigmatizing Tennyson and Browning, they will find some psychological doubts and confusion, which are representative of the age itself. So, in the sense you are saying, in this sense, he represents his age, and an eagerness for progress and dynamism. Yes, it is there. This psychological doubt and confusion will be there, and it will be appreciated by moderns because it tallies our experience, modern experience. Thank you for the question.
Okay, sir. The next question is from Susmita Sen. Can you call Ulysses an egotist or a selfish person who places his own desires and feelings above the common good?
So Susmita Sen has raised a very pertinent question. Actually, there is a great divide among the critics. Some critics, ironists, say that no, not myself. No, not me, when he says, I quote that phrase, no, not me. Definitely, it is egoistic. Throughout the poem, as if he tries to impress upon his audience, readers, the fact that he is meant for something great. And selfishness is there to some extent. Having come back to his home for after such a long time, he is directing his form towards his wife. It is not acceptable. But at the same time, I must say that this selfishness, this egotism, can be, can be interpreted in a different way. If you look at the poem from this angle, that yes, he was really a hero. Egotism, that sort of pride, is becoming of a hero. So he is a hero. He's a definitely egotist, and but egotism, that heroic spirit, is becoming of such a hero like Ulysses. It is there. And selfishness, you might take your own way, and ironist critics have criticized heavily him for that, for rejection of his wife, for rejection of the rugged people. He says, think of the terms, derogatory, pejorative terms, rugged people, aged wife, and savage race, you remember. These expressions are, revelatory of this, reveals selfishness, egotism, sneering attitude, you know, and colonial critics have talked about this sneering attitude towards the natives. So it is a streak of egotism and selfishness is there, but it can be interpreted in another way also, with reference to his heroism and with reference to ironist critics also.
Okay, sir. Two more questions. Thank you for your illumination. And the next question is from Buddha Debdas. Sir, we know that in Canto 26 of Dante's Inferno, Ulysses has committed sin. How do you relate that scene while reading Tennyson's Ulysses?
Yes, ironist critics have. That's why I am saying repeatedly that the ironist critics have foregrounded this aspect. They say that the poem is indebted more to Dante, because in Dante's Inferno that presumptuous act of crossing the borders of Hercules, pillars of Hercules, that crossing that border. To cross the border is to commit a sin. So he has committed a sin, ironist critics say. And in Ulysses, they find a sinner. So you may take your, Mr. Buddha Debdas, you may take your own way, that the concept of sin is very much there. The sin of living the people whom you are supposed to do. The sin of living wife, him whom you are supposed to live with, and that sort of thing is there. And indeed, in the Victorian period, people committed sin. People overstepped their borders. There are extremities in the land. Perhaps very, very tacitly it is undermined by Tennyson in the poem, that you are wallowing in wealth, you are having the best, world's wealth is accumulating at one place, and you are prospering at the cost of others. That sort of scene is there in Victorian England. And perhaps very tacitly, he is, Tennyson is participating in it and criticizing it. Sense of sin is there, definitely.
Thank you, sir. And then last question of this session. It is from Sheikh Saiful Rahman. Is sinking study somehow autobiographical? Sir.
Sheikh Saiful Rahman, I thank you for the question. Sinking star. I did not interpret it that way. It's something new or saying. I thought of sinking star means star which is going down yet radiating light. But a sinking star may be a biographical interpretation. It did not occur to me at the time. And also, I'm hard pressed for time, but definitely the sinking star is the halum to follow knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bound of human thought. When he says like that, at his heart of hearts, at the back of his mind, someone is there. A halum might be there. That sort of interpretation I welcome. Yes, but I couldn't mention during my talk because of the paucity of time. Thank you. Yes, it may be taken that way.
Thank you very much, sir, for your patience and answering all the questions. And now it's the time, and I request my colleague and head of the Department of English, Professor Arubodhan Chakraborty, for the formal vote of thanks. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Shobhan. Esteemed speaker, Dr. Debdas Rai, Associate Professor and Head, Department of English, Sukumar Sengupta Mahavidyalaya, respected participants and dear students. It is my privilege to propose a vote of thanks on this opening lecture of the online lecture series delivered by Dr. Debdas Rai on rereading Victorian poetry with special reference to Ulysses. On behalf of my department, I extend a very hearty vote of thanks to Dr. Roy for sparing his valuable time and delivering such an enriching talk. I must say that it was a wonderful and enchanting experience to listen to you, sir. Dr. Roy, in his talk, emphasized on the various important aspects to understand Victorian age and Victorian poetry. He spoke on the Victorian paradoxes, the clash between science and religion, doubts and faith, relativism and uncertainties. He also pointed at how the ideology or ideology of the Cambridge apostles becomes important to understand the genesis of the text. Dr. Rai's rereading of the poem Ulysses was an attractive one. He explained how the text can be read from the different perspectives, for example, the biographical, ironist, and the post-colonial standpoints. Drawing various analogies, his interpretation of the text becomes truly brilliant and vivid for all of us. Thank you, sir. I would like to express our gratitude to the President of our governing body, Sri Srikant Mahato, for his strong support for every academic endeavor of our college. I express our thankfulness to our principal, Dr. Montu Kumar Das, for his continuous inspiration for the lecture series. It is because of his stimulus and encouragement that we are undertaking this lecture. Thank you, sir, for your support. I extend my thankfulness to all teachers and students of our college, particularly the untiring efforts of my departmental colleagues and the dedication of the dear students of our department for making this program possible. I conclude my speech by thanking all the esteemed participants of this webinar, without whose presence and participation this event would not have been possible. Thank you so much for your participation. Thank you all again and have a nice and safe day.
Thank you very much. From the bottom of my heart, I thank you. For giving me the chance to speak. I really enjoyed the talk because there was no technical issue, no sound problem. I'm not that tech savvy, and I especially thank the viewers who have been listening, who have listened to me, kindly listen to me. And I beg apologies for overstepping my time. So it has been a pleasurable experience. My pleasure to speak here, and thank you for giving me the scope to speak.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, a little announcement to the participants. Please stay in the WhatsApp group because our upcoming lecture series, the updates of the upcoming lectures will be given there. Please stay with us, and keep us alive with your presence. Thank you. Okay, let's call it a day. Thank you, sir.